Hello everyone, I hope you're having a wonderful day. Today we're going to dive into the quiet morning after the humiliation at the dress shop, when James and Diep take little Nye to school, go inspect ginger fields for DJ, and then receive a shocking call that could send James far away on a long business trip. If you enjoy this video, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next episodes. The rooster crowed somewhere down the slope, its call floating up through the morning mist. In the small wooden house on the hillside, the first light slipped through the gaps in the planks and landed on the low table in the middle of the room. Diep moved quietly in the corner that served as a kitchen, the soft sound of chopping and clinking bowls trying to make the house feel normal again. On the cutting board lay a fresh piece of ginger, still dusty from the soil. She sliced it into thin strips and dropped them into a pot of rice porridge. Steam rose, carrying a warm, spicy smell that reminded her of winters in the mountains. Her wrist still stung where she'd scraped it at the dress shop yesterday, but she ignored the dull ache. Little footsteps shuffled on the wooden floor. "Mum, it smells so good," Nye mumbled, hair messy, eyes half closed. Diep turned, her face softening. "Go wash your face first, little bear, then you can eat as much as you want." James stepped in from outside, hair damp from cold water. He shook the droplets from his hands and flashed them a grin that was a little too bright. "Wow, ginger porridge," he said. "I thought our DJ company was still broke. Since when are we this fancy?" Diep shot him a look, but the corner of her mouth lifted. "Sit down. If you're late taking our princess to school, I'll pour this fancy porridge on you." They sat around the low table, knees almost touching, 3 bowls steaming between them. Nye blew on her spoon, cheeks puffed. "Mum, teacher asked yesterday why your hand is hurt," Nye suddenly said, pointing at Diep's bandaged wrist. Diep's spoon paused for just a moment. "And what did you say?" she asked lightly. "I said you slipped when you were cooking," Nye replied. "Is that okay?" James glanced at Diep. She nodded. "That's okay," she said gently. "Next time, just tell teacher your mum is clumsy." Nye giggled and went back to eating. The moment passed, but the humiliation from the dress shop flickered in both adults' minds, like a shadow passing over the table. Breakfast ended in a small storm of movement. Diep packed a tiny snack box for Nye, checking it twice. James dug around for a missing shoe, pulled it from under the bed, and pretended it had gone on a secret mission, making Nye laugh. Outside, the motorbike waited in the yard, still dusty but sturdy, their only bridge between mountain and town. "Helmet," Diep reminded, tapping the faded pink helmet hanging by the door. "Yes, boss," James said, putting it on Nye and tightening the strap. "Future DJ manager must be safe." Nye climbed onto the bike, hugging James from behind. Diep sat last, side saddle, one hand on James's shoulder, the other gently holding Nye's knee. The engine coughed to life, and they rolled down the narrow dirt path, leaving the house behind like a tiny wooden box on the green hillside. Fog hugged the mountain, making the road ahead look like it disappeared into clouds. James steered carefully around rocks and ruts. Ever since the accident on the grapefruit trip, he slowed down even more whenever the cliff edge appeared. He could feel Diep's hand tighten on his shoulder at each dangerous bend. "The school is having a drawing contest today," Nye announced loudly over the engine. "Teacher said we can draw our family." "Really?" James called back. "Then remember to draw me very handsome. If you draw me too handsome, it's still okay." "I'll draw Mum prettier than you," Nye replied. "Good," Diep said softly from the back. "Just don't forget to draw yourself." They reached the paved road at the foothill. The town soon appeared with its small shops, morning market stalls and a river of motorbikes. The kindergarten gate stood open, bright with cartoon pictures and coloured flags. Children hurried in with their tiny backpacks. James parked the bike. Nye hopped down. Diep smoothed the girl's hair and knelt to her level. "If anyone bothers you, tell your teacher," she said quietly. "And tell us when you get home, okay?" Nye nodded, suddenly serious. "Yes, Mom," James added. "And remember, DJ family does not bully anyone. We only export kindness. Understood?" Nye saluted, making them both laugh. She ran toward the gate, then turned and waved, small and bright among the other children. They waved back until she disappeared inside. Nearby, a couple of parents chatted. One of them glanced at Diep, then quickly looked away. Another leaned in to whisper. Diep pretended not to notice, lowering her eyes. James saw it all, his jaw tightening, but he kept silent. His hand brushed her arm lightly. "Come on," he said. "We still have work to do." They climbed back onto the bike. Without Nee's voice, the ride felt strangely quiet. As they left the school area, James raised his voice over the traffic. "For today," he said, "we can go check those ginger fields I told you about, past the next village." "The family whose son brought ginger to the market?" Diep asked. "Yeah," James replied. "Their land is good. If the quality is stable, DJ can make a long-term deal. We can't rely on only one product forever." Diep rested her cheek against his back for a brief second. "Do you think ginger from these hills can compete with traders in the city?" "We're not copying them," he said. "We're building something of our own. Clean products, clear origin, real stories of the farmers. That's our strength." "And the price?" she teased softly. "You always leave that part for later." "Price," he said, "is what we'll fight for together, Boss Diep. Today we just go and see. No promises yet." They turned off the main road and headed toward the countryside again, passing rice fields and scattered houses. The fog slowly melted under the growing sunlight. The further they went, the more the town noise disappeared behind them, replaced by birds, wind, and the distant sound of someone chopping wood. At a fork in the road, one path led back toward the three-way junction, where the DJ office stood. The other climbed toward the ginger farmer's village. James turned the handlebar toward the hills. The engine strained as the bike began to climb, small stones skittering under the tyres. Behind him, Diep tightened her grip and looked up at the pale blue sky. Yesterday, she'd been kicked out of a bright, shiny dress shop. Today, she was riding into the mountains to look at ginger fields and talk about prices. Somewhere between those two worlds, their life was quietly taking shape. The road narrowed as they climbed higher. Terraced fields opened on both sides, some already harvested, some still green. At a bend, James slowed and pointed ahead. "That's the house," he said, "the one with the tall areca tree." A low tile-roofed house sat against the hillside, smoke curling from its kitchen. In front, a woman spread sliced ginger on bamboo trays, turning the pieces so they dried evenly in the sun. A small boy chased a chicken around her bare feet. James parked by the path. The woman shaded her eyes, then smiled in recognition. "Hey, it's the grapefruit buyer," she laughed. "Today you're buying ginger?" "Trying to," James replied, hopping off. He helped Diep down. "If you still have some left to sell." "We heard your ginger is good," Diep added. "Can we take a look?" The woman led them behind the house. A narrow terrace climbed the slope, rows of ginger growing between banana trees. She dug around one plant and pulled out a clump of pale yellow roots wrapped in rich brown soil. Diep knelt, broke off a piece, and rubbed the skin with her thumb. The smell of fresh ginger hit her nose, sharp, clean, a little sweet. "This is good," she said, "not too fibrous." James was already in work mode. "How many kilos can you harvest this season? If DJ buys regularly, can you gather more from neighbours?" The woman laughed. "If the price is fair, the whole village will dig for you." They sat under a jackfruit tree and talked. James scribbled in his notebook, "Yield, harvest time, rough price." Diep took a few photos with her old phone. The ginger fields, the tray of sliced roots, the woman's hands stained with soil. When they finished, the woman poured them hot tea into chipped cups. "You two look tired," she said kindly. "Business hard these days?" James gave a small smile. "Hard, but still moving. As long as the hills grow something, DJ will keep trying." "Just don't forget us farmers when you do well," she joked. "Without you, there is no DJ," Diep replied simply. They left a little later, promising to return with a clearer offer after checking transport and storage. As they rode away, Diep held the small sample bag against her chest. "Do you really think we can make this work?" she asked over the wind. "Buy from them, put our name on it, Send it further than the next market. We'll start small, James said. Test a batch. If it sells, we grow. If it doesn't, at least we failed honestly. By the time they reached town again, the sun was high. James didn't stop at the DJ office. Instead, he turned straight toward the hill road. "You're not checking your emails?" Diep asked from the back. "They'll still be there tonight," he said. "I want to go home first." The climb back up felt slower. Afternoon light made the grass on the slopes glow gold. When they finally parked in front of the wooden house, Diep felt tired but strangely content. Inside, she set the ginger sample on the low table. It looked small but important. James washed his face outside and came in, stretching out on the floor. "We should dry some in the yard," he said, looking at the bag. "Let Nee see what her parents are planning to sell." "You make everything sound easy," Diep said, sitting opposite him. "It's not easy," he replied. "But if we only talk about how hard it is, we'll never start." For a while, they sat in comfortable silence. Through the open doorway they could hear a dog barking somewhere down the slope, the faint sound of a motorbike, the wind brushing the long grass. "Do you ever regret it?" Diep asked quietly. "Leaving your father's house, building DJ, living up here?" James rolled onto one elbow, looking at her seriously. "I regret not having more money so you don't have to count every coin," he said. "But choosing you and Nye, choosing this little house and this crazy company? No!" Her shoulders loosened a little. She opened her mouth to answer, but at that moment James's phone buzzed across the table. He glanced at the screen. The name made his expression harden. "Dad," he muttered. He stood and stepped outside to the small yard. Diep didn't follow, but in a house that small, distance meant very little. She could hear the older man's firm, clipped tone, even if the words blurred together. James put the phone to his ear. "Hello, Dad." "I've sent you some documents," his father said without greeting. "There's a project that needs a family member on site. The board agreed. You'll go." James frowned. "Go where?" "Overseas," his father replied. "Our partner needs someone for several months, possibly longer. This is an opportunity and a responsibility. Don't treat it lightly." James's eyes drifted back through the doorway to the ginger bag on the table. "Dad, DJ is still young. I can't just disappear now. And my family..." "Your family will still be there if they truly care," his father cut in. "Business will not. You've been playing in the mountains long enough. It's time to work properly." "This is proper work to me," James said, voice low. "Stop arguing," the older man snapped. "Tickets will be arranged. If you refuse, don't expect any more support. Not for DJ, not for anything else." The line went dead. James lowered the phone slowly. The wind moved through the grass in front of him. The hills that had felt like shelter suddenly seemed very far from everything his father was talking about. He walked back inside. Diep was still at the table, hands folded in her lap. Her eyes searched his face. "Your father?" she asked. "What did he say?" James sat down opposite her. The ginger bag lay between them like a small, quiet witness. "He wants me to go on a business trip," James said. "Far away. For quite a while." "How long is quite a while?" Diep asked. He tried to smile. "Long enough to make everything here complicated." Silence fell over the little room. Outside, the light on the hillside softened as the sun dropped lower, painting the grass with orange edges. Inside, the shadows grew longer on the wooden floor. A few hours ago, their world had been simple. Nee's drawings at school, ginger on bamboo trays, plans scribbled into a notebook. Now, without warning, another road had appeared in front of them, one neither of them had asked for, leading somewhere far beyond the mountains. Diep looked at James, then at the ginger bag, then back at him again. "Are you going?" she asked. He didn't answer yet. The question hung between them, heavier than any debt, as the day slowly slipped into evening.
Chặt 3 hoặc 4 khúc cho đẹp để bán được giá. Đồng mía cao dần, 45 đồng trở thành hy vọng cho phiên chợ. Một cây mía đổ bất ngờ khiến cả nhóm kêu, rồi cười xòa vì kịp đỡ nhau. Chiều xuống Linda buồn bã, vì con rúi của mình đã biến mất. Nghi có kẻ trộm rình quanh nhà. CEO quang ghế đến lắng nghe và trấn an và tự sửa chiếc camera cũ trong kho, kéo dây lắp trước sân nhà để bảo vệ cô. Đêm đến, Linda nấu cơm nếp cẩm mời anh ở lại ăn. Hai người trò chuyện lòng ấm lại. Quang kể áp lực công ty, camera nháy sáng, bóng lạ thoáng qua, và không biết Linda có sống sót qua được đêm nay không. Mọi người nếu thấy video hay, hãy cho mình một like, một subscribe. Cảm ơn mọi người nhé.